Hi guys. So we read the first 14 pages of Wonder and now we are going to move on, and right now where we left off, August or Augie found out that he was going to 5th grade and it was going to be his first time at school. He was a little nervous and he said he didn't want to go, and I loved the responses I got on the discussion post. So keep up the great work. So now we are going to continue reading Wonder, and we are going with paging Mr. Tushman. I would have never been more nervous about meeting Mr. Tushman if I'd known I was going to be meeting some kids from the new school. But I didn't know, so if anything, I was kind of giggly. I couldn't stop thinking of all the jokes Daddy had made about Mr. Tushman's name. So, when me and Mom arrived at Breacher Prep a few weeks ago before the start of school, I saw Mr. Tishman standing there waiting for us at the entrance. I started giggling right away. He didn't look at all like I had pictured, though. I guess, though, he would have been a huge but he didn't. In fact, he was a pretty normal guy, tall and thin, old but not really. He seemed nice. He shook my mom's hands first. Hi, Mr. Tishman. Nice to see you again, said Mom. This is my son, August. Mr. Tishman looked right at me and smiled and nodded. He put his hand on me. He put his hand out for me to shake. Hi, August, he said, totally normal. It's a pleasure to meet you. Hi, I mumbled, dropping my hand into his hand while I looked down at my feet. He was wearing red Adidas. So, he said, kneeling down in front of me so I couldn't look at his sneakers, but I had to look at his face. Your mom and dad have told me a lot about you. Like, what have they told you? I asked. Sorry? Honey, you have to speak up. Like what? I asked, trying not to mumble, but I admit I have a bad habit of mumbling. Well, that you like to read, said Mr. Tushman, and that you're a great artist. He had blue eyes and white eyelashes, and you're into science, right? Uh-huh, I said, nodding. We have a couple of great science electives at Breacher. He said, maybe you'll take one of them. Uh-huh, I said, though I had no idea what an elective was. So, are you ready to take a tour? You mean we're doing that now? I said. Did you think we were going to the movies? He answered, smiling as he stood up. You didn't tell me we were taking a tour, I said to Mom in an accusing voice. Augie, she started to say. It'll be fine, August, said Mr. Tushman, holding out his hand out for me. I promise. I think that he wanted me to take his hand, but I took Mom's instead. He smiled and started walking towards the entrance. Mommy gave my hand a little squeeze, though I don't know if it was an I love you squeeze or an I'm sorry squeeze. Probably a little bit of both. The only school I've ever been inside before was Via's. When I went with Mom and Dad to watch sing in the spring concert and stuff like that. This school was very different. It was smaller. It smelled like a hospital. Nice, Mrs. Garcia. We followed Mr. Tushman down a few halls. Sorry, down a few halls. There weren't a lot of people around. There were few people who were there. The few people who were there didn't seem to notice me at all. Though that may have been because they didn't see me. I sort of hid behind Mom as I walked. I know that sounds kind of babyish for me, but it wasn't a feeling very brave. I wasn't feeling very brave right then. We ended up in a small room with words "Office of the Middle School Director" on the door. Inside there was a desk with a nice seeming lady sitting behind it. "This is Mrs. Garcia," said Mr. Trishman. And the lady smiled at Mom and took off her glasses and got out of her chair. My mother shook her hand and said, "Isabella Pullman, nice to meet you." "And this is August," said Mr. Trishman. Mom kind of stepped to the side a bit so I would move forward. Then that thing happened that I've seen happen a million times before. When I looked up at her, Mrs. Garcia's eyes dropped for a second. It was so fast no one else had noticed, since the rest of her face stayed exactly the same. She was smiling, a really shiny smile. "Such a pleasure to meet you, August," she said, holding out her hand for me to shake. "Hi," I said quietly, giving her my hand, but I didn't want to look at her face, so I kept staring at her glasses, which hung from her chin around her neck. "Wow, what a firm grip," said Mrs. Garcia. Her hand was really warm. "The kid's got a killer handshake," Mr. Trishman agreed, and everyone laughed above my head. "You can call me Mrs. G," Mrs. Garcia said. I think she was talking to me, but I was looking at all the stuff on her desk now. "That's what everyone calls me, Mrs. G. I forgot my combination. Mrs. G, I need a late pass. Mrs. G, I want to change my elective." "Mrs. G actually is the one who runs this place," said Mr. Trishman, which again made all the grown-ups laugh. "I'm here every morning at 7:30, Mrs. Garcia continued, still looking at me while I stared at her brown sandals with a small purple flower on the buckle. "So if you ever need anything, August, I'm here. I'm the one to ask. And you can ask me anything." "Oh, okay," I mumbled. "Oh, look at that cute baby," Mom said, pointing to one of the photographs on Mrs. Garcia's bulletin board. "Is he yours?" "No, my goodness," she said, smiling with a big smile. That was totally different from her shiny smile. "You've just made my day. He's my grandson." "Such a cutie," said Mom, shaking her head. "How old?" "In this picture, he was 5 months, I think. But he's big now. Almost 8 years old." "Wow," said Mom, nodding and smiling. "Well, he is absolutely beautiful." "Thank you, Mrs. Garcia," said Mrs. Garcia, nodding like she was about to say something else about her grandson, but then all of a sudden her smile got a little smaller. We're all gonna take very good care of August," she said to Mom. And I saw her give Mom's hand a little squeeze. I looked at Mom's face, and that's when I realized she was as nervous as I was. I guess I liked Mrs. Garcia when she wasn't wearing a shiny smile. So guys, just really quick, shiny smile means it wasn't real. It was just plastered on. So, like, this is my legit smile when I'm talking to you guys. But a shiny smile means like it's forced on. So it wasn't genuine. Like when she was talking about her grandson. So she was talking about her grandson and she was happy and smiling. And then she went to like, it's called a political smile. Just smile. Everything's okay. Jack, Will, Julian, and Charlotte. We followed Mr. Trishman into a small room across from Mrs. Garcia's desk. He was talking as close to the door to his office and sat behind a big desk. Though I wasn't really paying attention to what he was saying, I was looking around at all the things on his desk. Cool stuff like a globe that floated in the air, a Rubik's type cube made with little mirrors. I liked his office a lot. I liked that there were all these neat little drawings and paintings by students on his wall, framed like they were important. Mom sat down in the chair in front of Mr. Tishman's desk, and even though there was another chair right next to hers, I decided to stand beside her. Why do you why do you have your own room and Miss G doesn't? I said. You mean why do I have an office? Asked Mr. Tishman. You said she runs the place, I said. Oh, well, I was kind of kidding. Mrs. G is my assistant. Mr. Tishman is the director of the middle school, Mom explained. Do they call you Mr. T? I asked, which made him smile. Do you know who Mr. T is? He answered. I pity the fool, he said in a funny, tough voice, like he was imitating someone. I had no idea what he was talking about. Anyway, no, said Mr. Tishman, shaking his head. No one calls me Mr. T, though I have a feeling I'm called a lot of other things I don't know about. Let's face it, a name like mine is not easy to live with. You know what I mean? Here I have to admit, I totally laughed because I knew exactly what he meant. My mom and dad had a teacher called Miss Butts, I said. Augie, said Mom, but Mr. Tishman laughed. Now that's bad, said Mr. Tishman, shaking his head. I guess I shouldn't complain. Hey, so listen, August, here's what I thought we would do today. Is that a pumpkin? I said, pointing to a frame in the painting. Pointing to a frame painting behind Mr. Tishman's desk. Augie, sweetie, don't interrupt, said Mom. You like it? He said Mr. Tishman, turning around looking at the painting. I do too. And I thought it was a pumpkin too, until the student who gave it to me explained it's actually not a pumpkin. It is. Are you ready for this? A portrait of me. Now, August, I ask you, do I really look that much like a pumpkin? No, I answered, though I was thinking, yes. Something about the way his cheeks puffed out when he smiled made him look like a jack-o'-lantern. Just as I thought that, it occurred to me how funny that was. Cheeks, Mr. Tishman? Oh, and I started laughing a little. I shook my head and covered my mouth with my hand. Mr. Tishman smiled like he could read my mind. I was about to say something else, but then all of a sudden I heard other voices in the office. Kids' voices. I'm not exaggerating when I say this, but my heart literally stopped beating like I just run the longest race in the world. The laughter I had inside me poured out. The thing is, when I was little, I never minded meeting new kids because all the kids I met were little too. What's cool about little kids is that they don't say stuff to try and hurt your feelings, even though sometimes they do say stuff that hurts your feelings, but they don't actually know what they're saying. But big kids, though, they know what they're saying, and that is definitely not fun for me. One of the reasons I grew my hair long last year was that I like how the long bangs cover my eyes. It helps me block out things I don't want to see. Mrs. Garcia knocked on the door and poked her head inside. They're here, Mr. Tishman, she said. Who's here? I said. Thanks, said Mr. Tishman to Mrs. Garcia. I asked though, oh, August, I thought it would be a good idea for you to meet some students who'll be in your homeroom this year. I figured they'd take you around the school a bit, show you the lay of the land, so to speak. I don't want to meet anyone, I said to Mom. Mr. Tishman was suddenly right in front of me, his hands on my shoulder, leaned down and very softly in my ear. It'll be okay, August. These are nice kids, I promise. You're gonna be okay, Augie, Mom whispered with all her might. Before she could say anything else, Mr. Tishman opened the door to his office. Come on, kids, he said, and walked boys and a girl. None of them looked over at me or Mom. They stood by the door straight at Mr. Tushman like their lives depended on it. Thanks for coming. Thanks so much for coming, guys, especially since school doesn't start until next month, said Mr. Tushman. Have you had a good summer? All the kids nodded, but no one said anything. Great, said Mr. Tushman. So, guys, I wanted you to meet August. He is going to be a new student this year. August, these are the guys these guys have been students at Breach Prep since kindergarten. Though of course they were here in the lower school building. But they know all the ins and outs of middle school program. And since you're all in the same homeroom, I thought it'd be nice if you got to know each other just a little before school started. Okay? So the kids, this is August. August, this is Jack Will. Jack Will looked at me and put his hand out. When I shook it, he kind of half smiled and said, "Hey," and looked down really fast. This is Julian, said Mr. Tushman. Hey, said Julian, and did the exact thing as Jack Will. Took my hand, forced a smile, looked down. And Charlotte, said Mr. Tushman. Charlotte had the blondest hair I've ever seen. She didn't shake my hand, but gave me a quick wave and smiled. Hi, August. Nice to meet you, she said. Hi, I said, looking down. She was wearing bright green Crocs. So, said Mr. Tushman, putting his hands together in a kind of slow clap, what I thought you guys could do is take August on a little tour of the school. Maybe you should start on the 3rd floor. That's where your homeroom class is going to be. Room 301, I think, Miss G. Is 301, Miss G called out from the other room. 301, Mr. Tushman nodded. And then you can show August the science lab and the computer room. Then work your way to the library, the performance space on the 2nd floor. Take him to the cafeteria, of course. Should we take him to the music rooms? Asked Julian. Good idea. Yes, said Mr. Tushman. August, do you play any instruments? No, I said. It wasn't my favorite subject on account of the fact that I don't really have ears. Well, I do, but they don't exactly look like normal ears. Well, you may enjoy seeing the music room anyway, said Mr. Tushman. We have a very nice selection of percussion instruments. August said, August, you've been waiting to learn to play the drums, said Mom, trying to get me to look at her. But my eyes were covered with my bangs as I stared at a piece of old gum that was stuck to the bottom of Mr. Tushman's desk. Great. Okay, so why don't you guys get going, said Mr. Tushman. Just be back here in, he looked at Mom, half an hour, okay? I think Mom nodded. So, is that okay with you, August, he asked. I didn't answer. Is that okay, August? Mom repeated. I looked at her now. I wanted her to see how mad I was at her. But then I saw her face and just nodded. She seemed more scared than I was. The other kids had started out the door, so I followed them. See you soon, Mom said. Her voice sounded a little higher than normal. I didn't answer her. The Grand Tour. Jack, Will, Julian, Charlotte, and I went down the big hall to some wide stairs. No one said a word as we walked to the 3rd floor. When we got to the top of the stairs, we went down a little hallway full of lots of doors. Julian opened the door and marked 301. This is our homeroom, he said, standing in front of the half-open door. We have Mrs. Petosa. They said, she's okay, at least for homeroom. I heard she's really strict if you get her for math, though. That's not true, said Charlotte. My sister had her last year, and she said she was totally nice. Not what I heard, answered Julian, but whatever. He closed the door and continued walking down the hallway. "This is the science lab," he said when he got to the next door. And just like that, and just like he did 2 seconds ago, he stood in the halfway open door and started talking. He didn't look at me once while he talked, which was okay because I wasn't looking at him either. You don't you won't know who you have for science until the first day of school, but you want Mr. Haller. He used to be in the lower school. He would play with tuba with this giant tuba in class. It was a Bartholomew horn, said Charlotte. It was a tuba, answered Julian, closing the door. Dude, let him go inside so he could check it out, Jack Will told him, pushing past Julian, opening the door. Go inside if you want, Julian said. It was the first time he looked at me. I shrugged and walked over to the door. Julian moved out the way quickly, like he was afraid like I might accidentally touch him as I passed by. Nothing much to see, Julian said, walking in after me. He started pointing at a bunch of stuff around the room. That's the incubator. That big black thing is the chalkboard. These are the desks. These are the chairs. Those are the Bunsen burners. This is a gross science poster. This is chalk. This is the eraser. I'm sure he knows what an eraser is, Charlotte said, sounding a little like Via. How would I know what he knows? Julian answered. Mr. Tushman said he's never been to school before. You know what an eraser is, right? Charlotte asked me. I admit, I was feeling so nervous I didn't know what to say except to look for the door. Hey, can you talk? Asked Jack Will. Yeah, I nodded. I still really hadn't looked at any of them not directly. You know what an eraser is, right? Asked Jack Will. Of course, I mumbled. I told you there's nothing to see in here, said Julian, shrugging. I have a question, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What exactly is homeroom? Is that like a subject? No, that's a group. That's your group, explained Charlotte, ignoring Julian's smirk. It's like where you go when you get to school in the morning and your homeroom teacher takes attendance and stuff like that. In a way, it's your main class, even though it's not really class. I mean, it's a class, but I think he gets the point, Charlotte, said Jack Will. Do you get it? Charlotte asked me. Yeah, I nodded. So homeroom is kind of like our morning meeting, right? Okay, let's get out of here, said Jack Will, walking away. Wait, Jack, we're supposed to be answering questions, said Charlotte. Jack Will rolled his eyes a little and he turned around. Do you have any more questions? He asked. No, I answered. Oh, well, actually, yes. Is your name Jack or Jack Will? My first name is Jack. Will is my last name. Oh, because Mr. Tushman introduced you as Jack Will. So I thought, ha, you thought my name was Jack Will. Oh, you thought his name was Jack Will, laughed Julian. Yeah, some people call me by my first and last name. Jack said, shrugging. I don't know why. Anyway, can we go now? Let's go to the performance space next, said Charlotte, leading the way out of the science room. It's very cool. You'll like it, August. The performance space. Charlotte basically didn't stop talking as we headed down the second floor. She was describing the play they had put on last year, which was Oliver. She played Oliver even though she was a girl. As she said that she pushed open the double doors to a huge auditorium. At the other end of the room was a stage. Charlotte started skipping towards the stage. Julian ran after her and then turned around halfway down the aisle. Come on, he said loudly, waving for me to follow him, which I did. There are like hundreds of people in the auditorium that night, said Charlotte, and it took me a second to realize she was still talking about Oliver. I was so nervous. I had so many lines, and I had all these songs to sing, and it was so hard. Although she was talking to me, she really didn't look at me much. On opening night, my parents were all the way in the back of the auditorium, like where Jack is right now. But the lights were off, so you couldn't really see that far back. So I was like, where are my parents? Where are my parents? And then Mr. Resnick, our theater arts teacher last year, said, Charlotte, stop being such a diva. And I was like, okay. And then I spotted my parents, and I was totally fine. I didn't forget a single line. While she was talking, I noticed Julian staring at me out of the corner of his eyes. This was something I see people do a lot with me. They think I don't know that they're staring, but I can tell from the way their heads are tilted. I turned around to see where Jack had gone. He had stayed in the back of the auditorium like he was bored. We put on a play every year, said Charlotte. I don't think he's going to want to be in the school play, Charlotte, said Julian sarcastically. You could be in the play without actually being in the play, Charlotte answered, looking at me. You could do like the lighting, you could do the backdrops. Oh, yay, whoopee, said Julian, twirling his fingers in the air. But you don't have to take theater arts elective if you don't want to, Charlotte said, shrugging. There's a dance, chorus, or band. There's leadership. Only dorks take leadership, Julian interrupted. Julian, you're being obnoxious, said Charlotte, which made Julian laugh. I'm taking the science elective, I said. Cool, said Charlotte. Julian looked differently at me. The science elective is supposed to be the hardest elective of all, he said. No offense, but if you've never been in a school before, why do you think you're suddenly going to be smart enough to take the science elective? I mean, have you even studied science before? Like real science, not like you do in kits? Yeah, I nodded. He was homeschooled, Julian, said Charlotte. So, teachers come to your house? Asked Julian, looking puzzled. No, my mother taught me, answered Charlotte. Is she a teacher? Julian said. Is your mom a teacher? Charlotte asked me. No, I said, she's not a teacher, said. No, she's not a teacher, said Julian, as if that proved his point. That's what I mean. How can someone not be a real teacher actually teach science? Well, I'm sure you'll be fine, said Charlotte, looking at me. Let's just go over to the library now, Jack calling out, sounding really bored. Why is your hair so long? Julian said to me. He sounded like he was annoyed. I didn't know how to say, so I just shrugged. Can I ask you a question, he said. I shrugged again. Didn't he just ask me a question? What's the deal with your face? I mean, were you in a fire or something? Julian, that's so rude, said Charlotte. I'm not being rude, said Julian. I'm asking a question. Mr. Tushman said we can ask questions if we wanted to. Not rude questions like that, said Charlotte. Besides, he was born like that. That's what Mr. Tushman said. Were you not listening? So, I was so listening, said Julian. I just thought maybe he was in a fire too. Geez, Julian, said Jack, just shut up. You shut up, Julian said. Come on, August, said Jack. Let's just go to the library already. I walked towards Jack and followed him out the auditorium. He held the double doors open as I passed by. He looked me right in the face, kind of daring me to look back at him, which I did. Then I actually smiled. I don't know, sometimes when I have a feeling like I'm almost crying, it kind of turns into an almost laughing feeling. And I must have had that feeling was having then because I smiled, almost like I was going to giggle. The thing is, because of the way my face is, people don't know me very well. Well, they don't know me very well. don't always get that I'm smiling. My mouth doesn't go up to the corners the way other people's mouths do. It just goes straight across my face. But somehow Jack Will got that I had smiled at him. He smiled back. Julian's a jerk, he whispered before Julian and Charlotte reached us. But dude, you're gonna have to talk, he said. He said this seriously, like he was trying to help me. I nodded as Julian and Charlotte caught up to us. We were all quiet for a second, all of us kind of nodding and looking at the floor. Then I looked up at Julian. The words supposedly, by the way, I said. What are you talking about? You said supposedly before, I said. I did not. Yeah, you did, Charlotte said. You said that the science elective supposedly was hard. I heard you. I absolutely did not, he insisted. Whatever, said Jack. Just let it go. Yeah, just let it go, agreed Charlotte. Following Jack down the stairs to the next floor, I started following her, but Julian cut right in front of me, which actually made me stumble backwards. Oops, sorry about that, said Julian. But I could tell by the way he looked at me, he wasn't really sorry at all. Okay, guys, that's where we're going to leave off for today. And so I want you to answer, and again, I will put this in our discussion post. I want you to answer why it may be rude or why it is rude just to stare at somebody or not make eye contact when you're talking to them or when you're introduced to them. And how do you think it really makes August feel? All right, guys, I'll see you later.